Morning, church. It's another fine morning to be able to spend time with Jesus. And I hope that today you're reminded to find strength and encouragement through the promises that we can find in our Bible. So let's keep pushing forward and let's hold him close to our hearts. With that, let's begin. If you browse through any kind of social media, you probably already have heard of something called a gender reveal. Now, especially these days for couples that are expecting a child, gender reveals are quite popular to do. Now, if you've watched some of these gender reveals on social media, you know that there are sometimes these events, the full out, parties that they have, activities, games, people, guess whether it's going to be a boy or girl. And usually by the end of these videos, or the highlight of these videos, is when they actually reveal the gender of the baby. And it could be through popping a balloon that has, different color powder, pink or blue, or cutting a cake that on the inside it's pink or blue, or opening a box of balloons, waiting to see what color balloon will come out, or some kind of exploding device that emits smoke of either blue or pink color. Now, most of us wouldn't think much about these gender reveals because it seems like a pretty innocent, not really anything that can cause harm or alarm or concern. But along with the rise of these gender reveals, there has been a slight increase in accidents that have resulted out of something as small as a gender reveal. For us here in Southern California, there was actually an event that was sparked by a gender reveal, right? Something that seemed so small, but had huge consequences. And that's the Dorado Wildfire that started in September of 2020 in Yucaipa. Now, this fire was often referred to as the gender reveal fire, not the Dorado Wildfire, because it started based off of a malfunction to the device, the gender reveal device that they had lit on fire, but it was supposed to produce smoke, but then it didn't. It caught the dry grass on fire next to them, and the rest is history. And as a result of this fire, there was more than 22,000 acres of land that burned, millions and millions of dollars of damage, and someone even died as a result of these fires. Now, something as small and minor as this, something that we might not really think of too much, resulted in such catastrophic consequences, right? This little thing became a big deal. And for this wildfire, all it took was one spark. And this can be said about a lot of other things. Think about water conservation. I remember growing up learning about the importance of using water responsibly. And as a kid, I remember watching Sesame Street, and there was a kid that would use the sink and it was connected to a lake, and he was like brushing his teeth. And in the lake though was a fish that was living there. And as he's brushing his teeth, he left the water running, he was washing his hands, he answered a phone call even. And yeah, it seems like a small thing to just leave your water running, but the poor fish had less water to swim in. Now, we might not think of it as a big deal. It's just a little bit more water being used, right? It's not gonna hurt. But there are definitely some long-term, big-time consequences that come as a result of these small things. Another great example is our words, right? The things that we say. I'm sure you've heard the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We tell people to say this because we want them to, not take words of people seriously and, don't let it bother you. Don't take it personally. But a lot of the times, this is easier said than done. Words really do affect us, even the small ones. Now, today we look at James chapter 3. And I want you to notice and see how the Bible shows us that the little things do matter, and specifically, words do matter. Here we find another great how-to, and that is how to tame the tongue. Now, first of all, the tongue is difficult to tame. Why else would the book of James teach us this how-to? But he shares some absolutely great insight on how we can tame the tongue, and really why it's important for us to even try taming it in the first place. Now, if you look at verse 3 to 5, you'll find that James illustrates for us 3 practical examples of why the tongue is important, which is a very small and somewhat insignificant part of our bodies, as we may think. Look at verse 3 to 5. It says, "If we put bits into the mouth of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire." Now, the first example here shares is a bit that you would put in a horse's mouth. And by using this bit, the horse obeys and goes in the direction you want. The second example is the rudder of a ship. It's really small in comparison to the big boat, but it's important and significant. With it, you can control and turn the ship in the direction you want it to go. And then the third example James shares is a small fire. All it takes, as I mentioned earlier, one small spark and a whole wildfire can be formed. And in the same way, James is making it clear that the tongue is no different. It's very small, but still incredibly powerful and significant. For James and for Christians, he wants us to know that if you can control it, you can control the entire body. And in doing so, he says, you can be perfect. So that's why we should definitely learn to tame it. But as we know, no one is perfect. And that's why it comes back to his main point. It's really hard to tame the tongue. In fact, it's not just really hard. Look at verse 7 and 8. It says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." James says that we can tame birds, beasts, reptiles, sea creatures. All of these animals can be tamed by humans, but no human can tame the tongue. It's just not possible. And now you might be thinking, wait, Pastor, isn't this supposed to be a how-to? Isn't this kind of discouraging us, thinking that we can't really tame the tongue and this isn't practical, this is discouraging? Well, it might seem that way, but the reality is what James is trying to do is he's trying to draw us back to God once again. If you remember everything else James has talked about so far, he is quite certain with the fact that the wickedness and the evilness of our tongues prove the fact that we are so helpless. But there is hope in something greater than you and I. If you remember in chapter 1, James is very clear. God is the source of all good, and he is willing and wanting to help us in all situations. And if we need wisdom, remember, ask the expert, ask God. And that leads us to his conclusion. God is the only perfect being, and that means he's the only one that can control our tongues. So remember this, if you want to tame your tongue, no human can, but God can. So keep God close in all that you do.